I wanted to start with having you talk to the skeptics who think Ayurveda is pseudoscience and who think it's baseless. Why should they listen to this conversation of ours?
I did not believe in Ayurveda growing up, and I ended up with so many surgeries. Every surgery leaves a scar behind. And when I started looking at the answers, it impressed me that I could have avoided all of them with the right dietary protocol.
What are the best foods for acne?
Beetroot, carrot, spinach. Research shows that women suffer more autoimmune disorders than men.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we become women living in a man's world.
Yep. What trending skincare should people stop using?
You know, to be honest,
Today, I have a very, very special guest, someone who's made ancient wisdom trend on Instagram, which also sometimes fuels the most passionate debates on wellness. She left an incredible investment banking and primetime television career to help the world breathe, eat, and just live better with purpose.
Yeah.
And that has attracted millions of followers. She has 2.3 million followers in 147 countries, teaches students across the world in 74 countries, and also through her health clinics, Prana, she's able to work with patients in more than 60 countries. Just incredible the impact that you've had. And I am one of the latest converts after reading both her books, because she's also the author to two bestseller books, The Ultimate Healing Code and Heal Your Gut, Mind, Emotions. So thank you so much, Dimple, for agreeing to come on to Sugar Coated. And I'm very nervous today because मुझे लग रहा है कि आप मेरा coffee and whey protein and creatine सब बंद करा दोगी.
I'll try to be gentle on you.
Yes, I'm taking baby steps right now.
Yeah.
But I wanted to start with having you talk to the skeptics, the ones out there who think Ayurveda is pseudoscience and who think it's baseless, the practices that Ayurvedic practitioners do. Why should they listen to this conversation of ours?
You know, like, first of all, I do empathize with people of all belief systems, right? Because I've been on the other side as well. I did not believe in Ayurveda growing up. It did not exist in our community, in our family, in our homes. We didn't have Ayurvedic herbs at home. We didn't talk about it. Our first protocol when we got sick was to run to the hospital, get medication. And I was so overly medicated as a child. I had pills every day as a 8-year-old kid, 9-year-old kid, for cold and cough and sinus. And I ended up with so many surgeries. Like 4 surgeries before the age of 18 or 20, I think. 4 surgeries was unreasonable for a child my age. And the trauma it carries, your body doesn't forget for almost 7 years. Every surgery leaves a scar behind. There's an external scar. You can get rid of it soon in a year or 2. There's an internal scar, like even now when I walk into a hospital, I have those shivers. And I cannot control it. It's not induced. It's just there. The memory is inside my body, right? When I started looking at the root cause of my disease, way later, 20 years later, after having done the entire circus of investment banking and TV production and everything, suddenly, by some, I think, luck, the universe shared this message that why don't you get into preventive healthcare? And when I started looking at the answers, it impressed me that out of my 4 surgeries, I could have avoided all of them with the right dietary protocol. So even if you don't believe in Ayurveda, you do believe that we eat food 3 times a day and it impacts your body. We drink water, 2 liters per day and it impacts your body. Ayurveda simply tells you how to eat that food, how to drink that water, personalized to your body type so you don't get sick. What's there not to believe in it? You believe in food, you believe in water, you believe in air, that's pranayam. You believe in sunlight, that's vitamin D, right? All your nutrients, vitamins, and minerals that you're consuming is in your plate. Ayurveda simply is a science of life that teaches you how to eat as per your unique biological blueprint, how to exercise, when to sleep, when to wake up, and what combinations of foods to eat and what combinations to avoid. So that is a science that teaches you how to preserve your health. The next step is, if you fall sick, recognize the early symptoms. The body whispers in the beginning, and then it screams when you don't listen. So when the body starts whispering through small symptoms like indigestion, bloating, constipation, incomplete evacuation of waste, skin rashes, pimples, acne, cold, cough, sinus, weak sleep patterns, your body is whispering. And then you start going into curative methods like, panchakarma treatments or naturopathy treatment, detoxify your body of the toxins that's causing havoc inside your body. When you move into the acute condition, that's when you need allopathy. So allopathy comes in the health spectrum towards the end, where you need a surgery, you need to address some emergencies like a heart attack or a fracture or a pandemic or an epidemic. That's when you need allopathy. But once you've recovered, you've got your life back, you still have to go back to a preventive healthcare life science to correct the root cause, the mistakes that caused it in the first place. Even if you have a heart attack, you can get a heart surgery done in the hospital, but you can't live in the hospital all your life, right? You have to get back home. You have to get back to changing your lifestyle, diet, and sleeping, eating patterns. That's what Ayurveda is. It's a science of life. It's just a manual on how you need to live better, nothing else. So there's nothing to believe or not believe in it.
And I think like the latest Stanford research on microbiomes has also started talking about some of the things Ayurveda always mentioned. A couple of days back, I read Jal Neti, which was considered to be like a very traditional Ayurveda practice questioned by the whole world. I think there was a PubMed paper which said that supports that Jal Neti actually cures sinus. Similarly, breath work now is being practiced across the world. So I think this whole medicine 3.0, where we're talking about preventative medicine, is something Ayurveda has always believed. But which parts of Ayurveda do you think require scientific validation, studies, trials, and which parts do you think should be more belief and just faith-based?
To be honest, when science meets nature, is when we can save humanity. So Ayurveda is nature-based. It's an observatory science. It's a collective wisdom of all our ancestors over the last 5,000 years who've survived and lived a long, healthy, happy life, right? How did our ancestors survive? The reason we exist today is not just because of modern science that we practice right now. It's because of the ancient practices our ancestors practiced through their collective intelligence and wisdom and intuition. When you start meditating, when you start focusing on your breath, you will start listening to your body from within. Your body will start speaking to you. That's Ayurvedic science, okay? So if you're someone who's intuition-based, Ayurveda will speak to you very immediately. Like it's a very quick relationship that you build with Ayurveda. But if you're someone who listens to the logical mind, you need a reason. Then, of course, take the modern science route. Take the R&D from modern science that has proven that, of course, turmeric is good for your health. Of course, Jal Neti helps in flushing out the unhealthy bacteria. Everything in Ayurveda needs validation for the future. Everything in Ayurveda. Even your Ashwagandha and your Shatavari, which has become the poster child in the West of Ayurvedic herbs, needs validation, needs customized trials or randomized trials to prove that they're effective. Ayurveda is a personalized science, which is why R&D has not been that effective. Because one treatment protocol for you will be effective, but it may not be effective for the next person with the same symptoms because of their unique biological blueprint and their family history and genetic history. So that's why Ayurveda is a personalized science and why R&D failed in some areas. But going forward, long-term survival, everything needs to be validated. And it's going to take us another 50, 100, 200 years to get there. We may not exist then. So am I going to wait 100, 200 years to fix my health? No. I'm going to apply my intuitive intelligence and I'm going to start responding. Something as simple as, it's just plain logic. You're having frequent cold, cough, sinus, and the mucus in your nostrils are inflaming your sinus glands now. And that's affecting your eyesight, your hearing, your ability to focus. It's leading to lack of coordination, concentration, mood swings, irritability. What is the root cause of the problem here? The mucus, right? So are you going to take a pill to suppress the mucus in the body? Or would you consider doing a Jal Neti, which is flushing out your sinuses with salt water to flush the mucus out of your system? It's easy to flush it out from here than suppress it and wait for it to come out through your colon. So plain logic there. I'd rather flush out my sinuses than take a pill there, right? If someone's having a heart attack, I can't give them an Ayurvedic remedy at that moment. Then I would tell them to go to an emergency hospital. So you have to be very selective. The right science at the right time can help you preserve your health.
There are, of course, for the ones who are looking at logic, how do they figure out the naturopathy? There's homeopathy, there's Ayurveda, there's, of course, like Unani, chakras. So in this, there are a lot of genuine practitioners who've done their research, done their homework. But then there are a lot of scammy, salesy kind of practitioners who you can't trust. And like the biggest fear sometimes people like me have is that we'll lose medicines jo milta
Oh,
hai.
gosh.
How do you control the quality? So what would you say to the audience? How to figure the right, authentic Ayurveda practitioners?
Yeah.
What to say no to, and what would you advise people to really, really stay away from so that they don't risk their lives hoping for some miracle?
You know, I would 100% advise and caution people not to consume anything that comes in a plastic pouch or a, you know, pudi jaise bana ke
Okay,
dete
so
hain.
you are against those
100%.
goliyan of homeopathy.
Yeah, because you don't see homeopathy golia, if it's from a brand like say a Dr. Batra or something,
Okay,
you can take it.
okay.
You know, because you know they've done their R&D. When you meet an Ayurvedic doctor or a practitioner, ask questions. That is the most powerful tool available to you to gauge how well educated and well researched that other person on the other side of the table is. If you don't ask questions, you'll never know. You don't go in with a blind faith. See, we're no more living in tier 2, tier 3 cities, okay, where we're dependent on our local Vaidya. You do have access to technology. You do have access to social media. You do have access to information. You can vet the information online on your own. Of course, you don't have to believe everything that's been sold online, right? Sometimes there can be a lot of
Yeah,
false
sometimes
information.
social media has a lot of false narratives.
Yeah. I literally relied on PubMed to build my career, to be honest. You know, every time a client asked me a question, like, how does Panchakarma help? Something as simple as, like, you know, why should I do a Basti treatment, which is a colon cleanse? And I said, okay, that's a great question. So I went back to PubMed and I found a lot of research from Harvard, Stanford, Atlanta, Georgia, Maryland universities. And when I looked at the collective report, all of them said the same thing, that 90% of the diseases are caused due to an unhealthy colon. And hence, keeping the colon clean is a first step to reversing diseases. I had my answer. So I would take Ayurvedic information and I would go back to PubMed because there are a lot of people doing a lot of work in R&D, and I would take that information to substantiate it. So you do not go extreme. You do not go in with a blind faith unless you're sitting in your mother's lap and you know you're consuming a medicine that she made at home in the kitchen. Then you go in with blind faith because you know mommy knows it well. But with everything else, ask questions. As a young child, I remember my mother used to buy me Chyawanprash from the chemist. And just the branding made me uncomfortable. And you know, she would give me this black jam and ask me to eat it, saying it's great for my immunity. And I said, do you know how many chemicals is in it? She's like, who told you there's chemicals? I was like, go back to the chemist and ask. The chemist obviously said it's all natural and this and that. And fast forward 30 years, I'm hearing things that indeed, you know, it's not all real, all natural. Like there's at least 30-40% of fillers and preservatives in it and coloring agents, which is unsuitable for a child's health. Ask questions. That's the most powerful tool you have. And whatever information you receive, look up PubMed, look up all these medical journals. If you find the answers, great, sorted. If you don't, try it once, like, you know, Jal Nethi. What if there wasn't any research? Try it once. If it's showing you results, great, you're on the right path, right? And when it comes to medication, fortunately, we do have some verified manufacturers. There are 8 original families of Ayurveda. We have like Vedyaratnam, Aryvedasala, Kotakal, Nagarjuna, AVP. These companies have been in business for the last 150 years. They have their own R&D department, their own manufacturing unit, 4,000, 10,000 employees. They know what they're doing. Buy only from branded Ayurvedic brands. Everything else, question it.
So the risk of some of these having steroids or whatever the allegations are around some of these homeopathic medicines, that you feel is lower because they are
Yes, slightly
probably
lower.
FDA or Ayush regulated.
They're FDA Ayush regulated. But let me tell you another thing. For example, there's a medicine for children's brain health. It's called Sarvastarishtam. And they put purified gold in it. Gold is a metal, right? It's a soft metal. They put 0.001 gram of gold per bottle of medicine, and that is proven to help memory power, strength, immunity in children for thousands of years. So that's a safe medication. Eating food out of silver utensil. Why do we do it from silver for children? Small portions of the silver metal gets released in the food in a very, very, very micro molecular manner, and it also sterilizes the food, and that is still healthy for us. Copper, storing water in a copper. So certain companies do use copper, silver, gold in their medication, or even a little bit of mercury, but in a very controlled environment, and that's only for acute conditions. It's not for us. So if someone's giving you medicines with steroids in it, definitely stay away from it. Buy the medicines, test it, and then consume it. Steroid is not good in the long run. It gives you quick results, but long-term side effects.
And which are like 2-3 Ayurvedic practices you feel that I'll be able to go to a PubMed or somewhere and validate, and
Yeah.
I can like tell 20 other people, because for everything else, like you said, it might work on me but
Yeah.
not on others.
Jal Neti, for example, is an yogic practice, not an Ayurvedic practice, but it has been validated by modern science. Haldi Doodh, we questioned it for the longest time. Now there's enough research and it's become like this huge
On
commercial
haldi,
brand.
but haldi doodh also?
Yeah, why not? Haldi
Okay.
Doodh, if the milk is cruelty free and if it's like, not got any kind of hormones and antibiotics in it, it's safe. Otherwise, you always have coconut milk, which is a safe combination. There's this new line of
Sorry,
science.
on this, just wanna, where do I find this good quality milk?
It's
Well,
a
unless
huge,
I have to get my own cow and
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
figure out a way
It's
to milk
a
her.
huge challenge in most cities, but there are some conscious brands that have started coming.
Okay.
Like, I don't want to be dropping the brand names, but you know the ones which I'm talking about. They promise that the cows have not been injected with growth bovine hormones, antibiotics. They're not separated from their calves. They're free-range cows, so they're allowed to, eat fresh grass.
Also, only A2?
Yes.
Okay.
For the Indian body. Indian bodies are designed to consume A2 cow's milk because, it's suitable for our topography and geography and we're able to better digest it. But to increase milk production during the white revolution that happened, they imported a lot of Jersey cows which give 4 times more milk than a Gir cow. And they started mixing the Jersey cow milk with the A2 cow's milk, which is why we all started having lactose intolerance. We started having indigestion because we didn't have the bacteria to digest that particular milk. So you want to stay away from Jersey cow milk. You want to have more of this A2 cow's milk, which is a Gir cow milk. And if you find a brand that says it is A2 cow's milk and it is, the Bologna method, then you can consume the ghee. But if you don't have it, it's best to move to a whole food plant-based diet. It's better to have coconut milk. It's better to have almond milk. That's way better, I feel.
And doodh plus haldi is also validated for what concerns? What does it help me solve?
So, something as simple as like, say, cold and cough, and you need to boost your immunity for your child who's frequently falling sick. Turmeric is anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, antiviral, and also antifungal when you apply it on the surface level, right? It reduces the free radicals that is floating around in your body, and it reduces the inflammatory stress response in your body, right? That itself is the root cause of 50% of the diseases. So when I put turmeric in milk, milk is a good fat that takes turmeric to the rest of the body. Milk is a carrier. If you don't want to take cow's milk, you can always take coconut milk. It still has some good fats. It has some omega-3s, right? It still takes the turmeric to the rest of the body versus drinking it in water, which gets flushed out very quickly. I want the turmeric to stay in my body longer. That's when milk plays a very powerful role. And we, of course, put turmeric in our sabji and dal in the Indian culture. We always use turmeric. Like, we don't need to have a turmeric latte. You still have it in your cooking. So something as simple as, turmeric doodh has been proven to be effective. A saline wash for your, sinuses has been proven to be effective. There's also this new line of study called Ayurgenomics. It's basically using genomic study to prove that you can predict diseases in a human body based on the unique biological blueprint. For example, I'm a Pitta body type in Ayurveda. Pitta means high metabolic fire, okay? And high metabolic fire means my skin, eyes, hair, small intestine, stomach, and liver sensitive to disorders. Now, this was written in Ayurveda 5,000 years ago. Ayurgenomics has come forward and linked it with modern science that says Pitta body type is called mesomorph in modern science, and mesomorph body type is prone to metabolic disorders. Endomorph body type is prone to lipid metabolic disorders due to excess mucus, water retention, edema that can lead to obesity, diabetes, cholesterol, and heavy diseases, thyroid, tumors, and cysts. Pitta mesomorph has metabolic disorders, GERD, H. pylori, acidity, burning sensation, hair thinning, hair loss, skin issues like eczema, psoriasis, urticaria, pimples. So modern science has proven that yes, you can predict diseases in advance based on your unique body type. And Ayurveda says when you know what your unique body type is, here's the dietary protocol. So now you can go backwards because modern science has proven half of it. I'm not going to wait for the rest of the half to be proven. I'll immediately go back to the source. I was like, since they said it first 5,000 years ago, and modern science is now saying, yes, indeed, mesomorph has metabolic disorders, I will look at the research here and start consuming the foods based on their research. So take 50 of each. It's a 50-50 relationship. Take 50% of Ayurveda, 50% of modern science and marry it. And you'll find your answers way much faster.
And since you mentioned acne, well, I've had a lot of acne growing up, all the way till like almost 40, 41. And, you said that acne generally indicates कि body के अंदर कुछ हो रहा है, which
Yeah.
is not okay, and it's just a symptom
Yeah.
of a deeper problem.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are going undiagnosed with
Yeah.
that deeper problem because the prevalence has gone up by 40%, especially women, in the last decade. And while we may think it's because of pollution, lifestyle, etc., what has your personal journey been? How did you get through your own acne journey, and what do you recommend to those who are dealing with it right now?
So only 10% of your acne is due to external variables. Like, it could be pollution, it could be toxicity in the water, or some kind of a bacterial infection. I've seen a lot of young girls with severe bacterial infection. The bacteria started eating their skin, causing very severe pimples and acne. And then they've had to use, harsh chemicals to wash off that bacteria. Only 10% of is external. 90% of it is due to the internal variables. The kind of diet you've had, the amount of water you're drinking, what time you sleep, and what kind of products you're also applying on your skin, because your skin is extremely porous. It's the largest breathing organ in your body. It's in fact larger than your lungs, and it's constantly absorbing everything through the pores. The water, when you shower, you'll notice that you're feeling hydrated.
Yeah.
Not because you drank water in the shower, but your body has been absorbing some of the moisture through the pores. When you jump into a lake, you feel hydrated. When you jump into the ocean, you feel dehydrated because the salt has pulled the water out of your body. Right? Your skin is extremely porous. So the products you apply also impacts your acne, but I would say 50% of it is entirely due to the diet you follow. Now, teenagers have a high metabolic fire. Okay, so they're pitta dominant during their teenage years between the age of, say, 13 to 40. 13 to 40 is when your metabolic fire is so high, it gives you the drive to accomplish things. You have leadership skills. You are extremely ambitious and, goal-oriented as a person. Internally, what it does is that high metabolic fire increases your appetite and you're constantly eating whatever is available. So that's the age when we start junking a lot. Breads and sandwiches and pizzas and burgers and French fries and deep fried snacks, which is easily available around your schools and colleges. In the vicinity, you take it and you consume it immediately because you've not been satiating that digestive fire within. What does your body do with all that excess oil? It creates more sebum in your skin. What does it do with all the toxin that hasn't got digested, absorbed, assimilated? It gets stuck in the gut for several days and weeks. Over a point of time, it starts causing leaky gut syndrome. It starts leaking from the gut into the bloodstream. And then the blood is desperate to get rid of it. It deposits it under the skin, hoping to get it out through the pores in the form of sweat. So it's basically your body's defense mechanism to bring the toxins towards the surface of the skin in order to flush it out through the pores. But the toxins are too big, and hence they've got trapped under the skin, causing pimples, acne, rosacea, eczema, psoriasis, urticaria, and all kinds of skin disorders. It's your body trying to flush out toxins through your pores, which is not the right way. It should go out through the colon. Then you need to fix your colon health, your gut health. Change of diet is where you'll be able to find solutions to it. Cut back on the oily foods, cut back on cheese. It's very unhealthy, the processed cheese that you have in the market. I would recommend a whole food plant-based diet. Cut back from meat, seafood, eggs, and dairy because they contain a lot of hormones. And when you're consuming hormonal foods, it is messing with the hormones in your body. I would go on a whole food plant-based diet. 2 bowls of fruits per day, 2 bowls of boiled vegetables or sauteed vegetables, 2 bowls of millets. It's a complex carb. It's not a simple carb that causes a sugar spike. 2 bowls of beans, lentils, legumes, pulses. These are my longevity protein sources. A handful of nuts and seeds, 2 liters of water. This will fill up my system. There's no room for anything else. And healthy snacking. I have a lot of healthy snacks at home. I would probably have like a jawar khakra if I feel like, munching on something, barley chips or an oat chip or something, something that's made with a healthy ingredient, roasted, baked versus deep fried. And I'm still satiating my hunger pangs and my craving for junk food and crunchy foods and staying healthy.
Is it possible though that there is somebody who's like in their 20s following a healthy diet, ghar ka khana, no processed food, working out, doing the right things, blood reports are fine, but still they have acne?
Yeah, that's possible. When your body is going through its menstrual phase, it is going through a cycle of hormones. The first 14 days, it produces a lot of estrogen to prepare for ovulation. When the body doesn't get pregnant, it starts shedding, it wants to shed, and it goes into the progesterone phase. It starts producing a lot of progesterone. Now, despite eating clean, healthy food and exercising, you're still developing acne because your liver is not able to digest and metabolize the excess hormones produced by your body and flush it out of your system. Okay? So whatever hormones your body is able to use, great. The unutilized hormones has to get broken down, metabolized by the liver and flushed out through the colon. There, you can take some herbs in your diet. Like, for example, the first 14 days to balance my estrogen, I could take pumpkin and flax seeds. They have phytoestrogens, which helps me balance estrogen. The next 14 days, from ovulation to the period cycle, I could take sunflower and sesame seeds. They contain progesterone, okay, and they warm up the body. Now, for someone who has acne, it is possible that the person is pitta dominant, high metabolic fire. Do not skip meals. Do not cook your food in oil. Cook your food in ghee instead, or cashew butter if you're a vegan. Load up on good fats. It might seem like an antithesis, for you to have a lot of good fats when you're having acne. Exact opposite. You're tricking your body into burning the fat first. Have a lot of avocados in your diet, coconut in your diet. This will help in reducing the heat in your body by storing good fat. And at the same time, you're tricking your body into using those good fats versus craving bad fat. Okay? Instead of looking for those hydrogenated fats, you're looking at this fat, not the trans fats. You can have a lot of cooling foods in your diet, like cucumber, zucchini, grapes, apples, pears, peaches. These are astringent. Berries, strawberries. They will help in tightening the collagen. You want to stay away from salty foods, spicy, pungent foods like capsicum, onion, garlic, radish, chilies, oily foods, deep fried foods, and you might also want to stay away from sour foods for some time, like lemon, tomato, and tamarind, because that can also trigger your acne. You can use it as a cleansing agent from outside. Just personalizing your diet and adding some seeds and herbs will get your body back in balance.
So you agree with that theory कि garam khana, जैसे including
Yes.
mangoes, including some of these very acidic foods, can actually also lead to acne?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, during the summers, I remember if I had 2 mangoes a day, I would have acne. But if I had 1 mango a day and balanced it with a glass of milk, back in the day I did have dairy, it didn't give me acne because mangoes were warm and milk was cooling. Garam tehseer and thanda tehseer. They balanced and cancelled each other, and thus I didn't have acne. But if I remember, we had gone to Lonavala during COVID, and my French friend who was staying with me ended up having 4 to 5 mangoes that night. And I was a little confused, watching her eat. I thought maybe, her body is able to take it. And next morning, I got an emergency call from her room saying, come up. I said, what happened? She was literally on the toilet floor, vomiting and having diarrhea at the same time. The body heat had gone up so much because of those 4-5 mangoes that her body was flushing everything. Even water didn't stay in her stomach. When she drank water, she would either throw up or have a diarrhea. So I immediately stepped in and gave her boiled stewed apples and buttermilk to drink. And finally, it stayed in the stomach. Finally, she was able to come out of it and she's like, what is this magic? What is this thing? She was on the floor, 4-5 mangoes, garam tehseer, the heat went up. And if I have a lot of oily food tonight for dinner, tomorrow I am going to have heat rashes and acne. If I'm going to have a lot of maida tonight in the form of naan rotis and kulchas and pizzas and burgers, tomorrow I'm going to have constipation. As simple as that. Your body is a direct reflection of what you've eaten, the thoughts you've had, the books you've read, and the kind of conversations you have. It's a direct reflection of all of that.
So I should just blame my acne on mangoes. I love mangoes. I'm like crazy about mangoes. So yeah.
Oh my God, have a glass of milk or at least have a
To balance out
tender
the-
coconut water every morning with the malai. It'll just cancel the heat.
And you've worked with a lot of celebrity clients. What are the habits do you think that these celebrities who have like the perfect skin, perfect hair have that are beyond just the fancy products that they use?
Their diet. It's their diet and hydration. I've seen most of the dedicated, committed, hardworking celebrities not given to their cravings. They have way more discipline, which is why they're successful, right? You think that once you've reached on the top, you can do whatever you want. Exact opposite. You have a huge responsibility to maintain that brand that you've become, right? So if your brand is like you're a beautiful actress that appeals to the Gen Z audience, you have to maintain that brand. So they have a lot of fruits in their diet. I've noticed them snacking on fruits. And if they need something salty, they'll snack on cucumber and carrot with hummus. They'll have olive oil. They'll have a bowl of berries and cherries and strawberries in the morning to tighten the collagen, to give them radiant skin.
Also.
Right? They do a lot of oil massages, by the way. They may not appear on your Instagram feed with oil on their face and hair, but trust me, some of the most dedicated celebrities, I've noticed them do a lot of oil pulling, gargling, brushing, tongue scraping, dry brushing for their body, head massage, it's called Shiro Abhyangam, full body massage, Abhyangam, Pad Abhyangam, foot massage. They do a lot of colonics from time to time to flush out the unhealthy bacteria and the undigested food. They are heavily invested in it, not just for vanity, for longevity, sharper mental faculties, and better productivity as well.
And talking about longevity, longevity में बहुत सारा different types of science है. Of course, there's a lot of it that you talk about how what you eat
Yeah.
can impact longevity. If I look at some of the American researchers, they talk about VO2 max, strength training से longevity होती है. अभी Dipinder just came out saying the blood flow to the head leads to longevity. And I saw in one of your podcasts you mentioned breathing slowly will help us live longer.
Yeah.
So what all do we need to do, and which are the longevity ka tricks and traits that you believe in, and which ones are you opposed to?
All of it has a place.
Okay.
There was a time when I was aggressively into CrossFit and strength training, and I thought I was at the peak of my health. And now when I look back at the pictures, I look like a bodybuilder in those. And I was like, that's not the appearance I want to have. But I also had terrible skin when I was doing that because my metabolic fire became aggravated, and I was having a lot of paneer as a source of protein at that point in time, which was messing with my hormones. Right? So my skin gave in and I started having fibroids. They started growing faster because of the excess estrogen that I was consuming. So everything has a place and a role to play. Now, if someone's an endomorph body type, heavy body type, they have thick bones, they have a tendency to gain weight, they have a tendency towards obesity, diabetes, cholesterol, fatty liver. They need an aggressive form of workout to pull them out of that slumber. They need cardio, they need CrossFit, strength training, weightlifting, convert the fat into muscles and heavier bone density. Please do it. A mesomorph body type, pitta body type. What is longevity for them is sports, competitive sports. They do very well with competitive sports. Like, put me on, tennis or squash or badminton or pickleball. I love the aggression in it, but at the same time, it satiates me and calms me down and puts me back to sleep. I'm not overdoing it, right? A vata body type does very well with creative movements, dancing, long walks, hiking, trekking, cycling. Something that's rhythmic is very good for them because they tend to be very restless as people. High amount of energy, they can tend to be a little scattered. So it's very good for them. Longevity tricks other than that, which is common for all of them, sunbathing, 20 minutes, must. We're like a complex house plant. We need water, we need sunlight, we need oxygen, and we need love. We can survive on this, right? Sunbathing, compulsory for all body types. Then you have movement. Doesn't matter what movement you pick, compulsory for all body types. After that, a balanced diet. It has to be whole food, which means farm to table, not factory to table. Everything that you should consume must be organic, healthy, and clean, not interfered with by the human beings in the form of preservatives and packaged foods and processed foods. You don't want that. Plant-based as much as possible. I recommend 95% plant slant at least. That's the secret of the blue zones, which has the highest number of centenarians. And they've proven it. They walk the talk. There are results to see. That's it. Movement, hydration, whole food plant-based diet, good social circle, no negative vices like smoking, drinking, alcohol and stuff like that. And building social positive connections, something that helps you build on each other. And make sure you sleep well. 6 pillars, that's what Harvard says, lifestyle medicine.
And where does breathing come in here? Like pranayam and just getting to breathe slower, like you mentioned.
So we're breathing right now. And we're connecting with our breaths. There's this whole science that, if we can connect with the breath of the other person and inhale and exhale at the same time as the other person, you're tricking that person into believing everything you speak. It's a mental psychology. You're matching your breath and matching your psychology also and the frame of mind. Breathing is something we do 24/7, right? Wake up in the morning and you sit down in a spot to do 20 minutes of pranayam or 10 minutes of pranayam. And even if you're not doing pranayam, just focus on your breath because that's the only variable in your body that you can control. Can you control your heartbeat? No. Can you control when your lungs contract and expand? No. Can you control the hydrochloric acid in your stomach? You can influence it. You can't control the production of it. Can you control when your food gets digested, absorbed, assimilated, or transformed into plasma and blood? You can't control any of the complex mechanisms in your body. You can influence it through 2 things. One is your breath. It's a variable completely in your control. I can stop my breath for a minute. I can inhale when I want and I can exhale when I want. But you can do that only through consciousness and awareness. So pranayam basically means being able to sit in one place, closing my eyes and focusing on that breath. That's all you're doing. And once you've started focusing on the breath, understanding when your body is inhaling and exhaling, you can start influencing it through Anulom Vilom, Kapalbhati, Brahmi. Then you start telling your body that this is how I want to inhale and exhale.
And if I'm somebody जिसने अभी तक breath work पे कुछ काम नहीं किया है, meditation नहीं किया है, तो where do I start and how do I build from there? How many minutes, what time,
Yeah.
which practice do I start with, and how do I build it up?
So the best thing to do is rise with the sun and set with the sun. When you wake up in the morning, right where you are on your bed, it's not easy to jump out of bed immediately because you need some minutes, for your body to collect and gather itself. Just wrap your blanket around yourself, or if it's too warm, without a blanket, and just sit, close your eyes with your palms facing upwards, and focus on your breath for a few minutes. Focus on when you're inhaling and exhaling, and just feel the rush of air. And then do Anulom Vilom, which is basically inhaling from your right nostril, exhaling from your left nostril, and then inhale from your left, exhale from your right. In between this, you can choose to hold your breath or not. So inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, and exhale for maybe 6 counts so that you get all the carbon dioxide out. When you're doing this, you're balancing the fire element in your body and the other elements. So you have Id and Pingla, you have Yin and Yang. And you're balancing the 5 elements in your body. You're balancing the sun, the Surya, and Chandra Bedi as well. The sun and the moon is getting balanced, the hot and cold. When you balance this, the homeostasis gets balanced. And the homeostasis is responsible for so many other functions in your body. Then you can move on to box breathing if you're someone who gets anxious very quickly. When you're at work, every 1 hour, if you can focus on 7 breaths, inhaling and exhaling consciously, not just inhaling, exhaling on the run. Consciously, you're inhaling, exhaling for 7 breaths. It'll immediately reduce your anxiety and cortisol levels. Then you can move on to box breathing, where you inhale for 2 counts, hold your breath for 2 counts, exhale for 2 counts, and hold that vacuum for 2 counts. You've come a whole box. Then you can increase it. 3 counts inhalation, then 3 counts holding your breath, exhale for 3 counts, and hold the vacuum for 3 counts again. Increase it to 4, then 5, then 6. This is called box breathing, which the military believes in, by the way. The army people would use it. Box breathing immediately reduces your anxiety and stress levels, gets your cortisol levels down, and then your gut microbiome starts releasing serotonin and dopamine, and you start feeling happiness and peace.
I've seen a live demonstration of this. One of my friends at a very high altitude, once in the mountains, had started getting altitude sickness, and her oxygen level was going down, and somebody just helped her with box breathing, and immediately within like a minute, she was able to bring her the headache and the altitude sickness that she had. It got solved, and I feel that skincare के लिए बहुत पापड़ बेलते हैं हम, but getting your anxiety, cortisol level down, probably from a long-term health as well as a beauty routine perspective, I think doing some of these, whether it's Anulom Vilom, meditation, or box breathing, can actually be the cheapest alternative to
oh my
some
God, available to everyone. The whole of humanity can access this, right? Without having to pay heavy bills. It's the cheapest alternative available, controlling your breath. And second thing is controlling your intentions. If you can control your intentions, it'll influence your thoughts. It'll influence the kind of thoughts you're going to have throughout the day, whether it's going to be negative, positive, aggressive, harsh, jealous, envious, whatever kind of thoughts and emotions you have, quite often are beyond your control, right? But you can control the intentions and your breath, you're sorted. The rest of it is for your body to perform miracles.
Best things in life are free.
Oh my God, right?
And you mentioned 95% plant slant. Is that what you said, if I heard you correctly? Which means that on our plate, 95% should be plant-based?
I would prefer that.
Wow.
Right?
That's hard.
I mean, honestly, it's quite easy if you look at it.
You don't count grains in this, or you count grains?
I count grains in it. Okay?
So wheat is included?
Absolutely. Now, say if you're having lunch, you can have a bowl of sauteed vegetables to begin with, or steamed salads. That's good amount of fiber. Your veggies have come in, and make sure you have at least 3 to 5 veggies per day. Have a colorful rainbow palette, okay, of veggies, and then you have your carbs, proteins, and some more veggies. So you can have 2 rotis, sabji and dal. And my roti would preferably be a millet roti. I'd lean towards like a ragi or a bajra, jawar, makai, amaranth. They taste delicious. There's quinoa and all of that. And the simplest trick is to get all your millets, grind it into a fine flour, and mix it with a binding agent like a kapli atta, which is again native and indigenous to the Indian soil and community. It's called emmer wheat. Okay, so it hasn't been genetically modified. The genetically modified wheat is unfortunately the problem here because of the gluten that is hard for our body to break down. So then I would bind it with kapli atta. So you have your 2 rotis, then I'll have another traditional sabji on the side. It could be your parval or your loki or your beans or your peas. If you want to have chole, channa, rajma for the dal, for the protein source, that's great. You have moong, tur as well. Make sure you have equal part carbs, protein and veggies. But before that, you have a portion of sauteed vegetables. So your intake is 50% fiber and then carbs and protein. And make sure there's at least 2 teaspoons of good fat. It could be avocados, coconut oil, olive oil. And if you don't want to have any of this, if you want to have paneer, if you want to have ghee, that's also fine. Just make sure that it's organic and cruelty free. So that's another way of balancing your meal.
And there are a lot of the skin issues which are also associated with gut or digestive issues. In fact, 60% of people have some digestive issues which are impacting their skin, which you spoke about earlier. What are like 3-4 mistakes that even the most evolved consumers are actually making?
The reason why most of us end up with skin issues, as per Ayurveda, is because of the wrong combinations of foods we're eating. Okay. Now, for example, I remember sitting on a podcast and, she said she loves a strawberry milkshake, right? It seems healthy that you're having some strawberries, which is fruit, good vitamin C and all your fruit acids, and then milk, which is a great base. It looks delicious, but in the long run, it causes a lot of skin issues, right? So milkshakes is probably one of the most abused categories of food, Mothers think they can just put like 2-3 fruits in the milk and give it to the child and get done with it. It's very unhealthy. Something
same for smoothies?
Yeah, same for smoothies. Smoothies, I think, are lazy man's ambition and goal to get healthy without having to work hard. And it's the worst approach because smoothies has 2 negatives. Number one, it is not cooked, it's cold. So when you have a smoothie, you're diminishing your agni, which is the digestive fire. So instead of stimulating it, you're diminishing it. It's like, taking a bucket of ice, cold water, or just ice itself, frozen ice, and throwing it on the campfire. And you're expecting the campfire to function. You're expecting the campfire to give you boiled water. It's not going to give you boiled water. It's going to get diminished, right? Number one, it diminishes your agni. Your agni is responsible for your digestion, metabolism, and immunity. Your ability to fight off pathogens comes from your agni, right? Number 2, smoothies is wrong because of the wrong combinations you're consuming, right? You're taking a fruit, you're taking a vegetable, you're putting in some protein like whey or something, and you're putting in, some other fine source of protein, mixing it together, boiling it,
and
or
seeds,
not boiling.
Some people put seeds
nuts and seeds and everything. You've made a khichdi out of it, I'm sorry to say. Like, that's not a healthy combination at all. Fruits should never be mixed with dairy, okay? Because fruits have active acids that causes dairy to curdle and ferment in your gut. And that fermentation in your gut can lead to metabolic waste, leaky gut syndrome, and other health diseases, right? And other health issues. Fruits and vegetables are also not easy to combine because fruits have fruit acids. They ferment, they get digested very quickly within an hour. Vegetables have a lot of complex insoluble fiber. They're meant to be consumed slowly. They're the fodder, the prebiotic for your gut microbiome, okay? So that's the way to feed it. Then fruits with grains. A lot of people have an oatmeal and put fruits on top. It's again bad because fruits then stays in the gut longer than needed, starts fermenting, reacting with the stomach acids. Whereas oatmeal requires longer to get digested. It slows down the process of the fruit getting absorbed and assimilated in your body. Or the fruit starts pushing the undigested oatmeal into the gut, which leads to bloating, gas, flatulence, and indigestion. Fruits can be combined with nuts and seeds. So your best smoothie is a traditional masala haldi doodh with kesar. So you're taking your nuts like almonds and peanuts, maybe not peanuts, almonds, walnuts, pine nuts, pistachio, dates and prunes and raisins, walnuts. You're mixing all of them with milk and putting some turmeric and some kesar. That haldi masala doodh is a traditional smoothie that we had in the Indian culture, but it's warm. Right? Then we have sattu milkshake.
And why is warm important for Agni?
Agni. You're stimulating your Agni rather than diminishing it, right? So it's like, when you're cooking food and you have a nice flame, you want to maintain that flame. You don't want to keep messing with the flame. You need to focus on cooking the food instead, right? The second one is your sattu milkshake. The pehlwans and the guys who did wrestling, the traditional ones, they would always have sattu doodh. They'll take 2 to 4 teaspoons of sattu powder, which is your chana powder. They'd add some dry fruits, some mishri, some milk, and they drink it up. Nice and warm. Again, a great way of getting your muscle mass up, getting your protein intake covered for the whole day.
This is a great replacement for whey as well. Whey protein.
Any day. Unfortunately, the whey that has been sold in the market, a lot of people have proven it that 8 out of 10 are contaminated with heavy metals, toxins, preservatives, fillers, coloring agents. And your fillers is like a glue that just sits in your gut. And I've seen a lot of bodybuilders come to our clinic with unhealthy liver, and chronic constipation because of the excess protein that they're having in the raw form, in the powder form, not cooked. That's the number one mistake. Number two, it's cold. It just goes into your system and diminishes the Agni. Wrong combinations and all the preservatives in it. A big
And
no.
how about
There's no
mixing the
fiber also.
sattu atta in the roti?
Great. You can
Okay,
make a roti and just mix your sattu. You get your protein. Instead of having a simple carb like wheat roti, you're having a complex one which is mixed with protein. So it prevents your sugar spike at the same time and also satiates your protein cravings. And if you get your protein in, your sugar craving goes down.
Yep.
People who crave chai are the ones who've not had enough protein in their diet. That's why they crave chai and sugar, to get that sugar rush. That's another thing that people need to work on, the cravings. Understand the root cause of the craving. Right? If you're craving salty snacks, it's because you're dehydrated actually. You don't have enough water in your body. So when you have salty snacks, salt, 1 gram holds 10 grams of water in the body. It holds hydration in place. That's why you're craving salty foods.
And sugar craving, you're saying, is because of protein deficiency.
Protein deficiency. Most of the time it's protein deficiency, and also people are not eating a balanced diet. Sometimes I also notice people, protein by default is sweet in taste, if you've noticed.
Yeah.
It releases the sugar component, the glucose, very, very slowly in your body, right? Some people end up eating too much sugary foods, which spoils the gut microbiome. So instead of having 85% good bacteria, 15% bad bacteria, your bad bacteria is multiplied excessively. And remember, your bad bacteria and parasites and worms are peeing inside your body as well. Okay, they're releasing all the toxic waste inside your body, and they're sending you all the unhealthy signals to eat more sugary foods so that they can thrive on it. So it's not you who's craving sugar.
That's where the addiction starts.
It's the unhealthy bacteria in your gut that's craving sugar. So instead of listening to it, you do the exact opposite. You have something bitter, Karela, neem. It destroys the unhealthy bacteria and reduces the sugar craving immediately. It's very potent, very powerful.
And those who over a period of time destroyed their gut bacteria because of all the processed food that they've had or lack of variety, how can they go about fixing it within a year or within 6 months?
Take a simple challenge. Okay, now there is one processed and packaged foods that's destroyed your gut microbiome. There's also antibiotics, by the way, that has destroyed your gut bacteria, right? What is antibiotics? It kills the good and bad bacteria and makes you start from scratch. And you'll notice that people who've been on antibiotic course, they'll say they've lost their taste buds.
Yeah.
Your taste also came from your gut microbiome. Your gut microbiome was telling you what to eat and what not to eat. And now they're dead. There's no one inside your body, the gut microbiome, to tell you what to eat. So the first thing you do is go on a fruit fasting for 24 hours where you eat only fruits for a whole day because that is your prebiotic good bacteria. Okay? Then you can also have fermented foods post lunch, like kombucha, kimchi, kefir, laban, sorkat, pickles, idli dosa, fermented foods. The best in our culture is pickles and idli dosa and even dhokla.
And dahi?
Dahi is also great, right? So you start investing in your good bacteria. That's like sowing seeds in your garden, but you don't need to do it every day because you don't sow seeds in your garden every day. You do it twice or thrice a week. And then make sure no matter what, every day you get 2 portions of fruits, 2 portions of sauteed vegetables, and a little bit of fermented food in your diet. And no matter what else you eat, this will keep you going. This is regrowing that rainforest that was inside you once upon a time. You've completely deforested it because of either antibiotics, preservatives, packaged foods, processed foods. You want to regrow it. So you start investing in that rainforest now. And it'll take 6 months for you to regenerate it, but it's worth it. And, there's a lot of research that also shows that, unfortunately, every time we take a dose of antibiotics or we are, on a spree of eating packaged processed foods, we lose a lot of good bacteria and we may never get it back again. So even if you've started going on a healthy lifestyle, out of, say, 1,000 diverse bacteria that you had before, now you probably have 900. You've lost some of them. That's also great because right now we are heavily sanitized as a society. We're living in an industrial complex. Our cities have become like small industries and factories. We're heavily sanitized, so we don't even have access to good bacteria anymore. You get it from your fruits and vegetables. Go out in nature at least once a month. Go for a hike or a trek. That will sort you out.
What other Ayurvedic principles that we've not discussed yet helps with skin and hair health for all the beauty-focused viewers out here?
I love ingredients from the kitchen. Okay, it's as simple as that. Number one rule is make sure to oil your body really well. Abhyangam. Whenever you feel you have dried off skin, dried off frizzy hair, dry colon, constipation, anxiety, poor digestion, poor sleep, do a full body massage with sesame oil, coconut, almond, castor, olive oil. Take whatever oil you like. Just warm it lightly, apply it all over your body. Sit in indirect sunlight for 20 minutes and then take a warm shower. That's the number one trick for balancing the body. And then look in the kitchen, for ingredients that you can use for your skin. Uptans are very common in Indian culture. We would use a basin, we would put in some dahi, some lemon, some turmeric. I would always have in my kitchen orange peel powder and rose petal powder, which I would make at home. I would just dehydrate the rose petals and make a powder, dehydrate the orange peel, make a powder. You can add that in your uptan. You can even make an uptan out of green mung beans. It's excellent for the skin. It's very clean, very
Green
soothing.
monk beans.
Green mung beans, your moong dal.
Oh, moong dal.
You can make a powder out of it. Excellent, right? And if you have sensitive skin, oat powder is great for children especially, right? They use oat powder, milk powder as well sometimes. You can make a powder of literally every dal in your kitchen. Masoor, chana, tur, green mung beans. All of them can be made into a powder, which is your foundation and a base. You can add rose water. You can add apple cider vinegar if you have too much acne and pimples. You can even add a pinch of baking soda if you feel like your scalp is not clean. You can make a hair mask with yogurt as a base. You can add a banana to add volume. You can add a strawberry to get some shine. What else can you add? You can add honey and olive oil to get straight hair. You can add lemon to get rid of dandruff, itchy scalp, psoriasis and eczema on your scalp, which is causing hair loss. There are so many remedies in the kitchen. So my first thing is to get in the kitchen. And the second thing is, of course, when you're traveling, it may not be easy. I look for organic brands that are plant-based, that are not tested on animals, and that don't have any harsh chemicals in it. I would lean towards those products.
And for those of us who have these issues because of emotional trauma, anxiety, stress over the years, especially common in women because we carry a lot of burden, especially in the 30s, 40s, that journey of responsibilities, aging parents, at the same time young children, careers flourishing, but also dealing with politics. What would be the recommendation from an emotional healing perspective using the principles that you've learned in Ayurveda?
Research shows that women suffer more autoimmune disorders than men. Women have more complex emotions than men. Women need more hours of sleep for recovery than men.
Absolutely.
Because physiologically we made different, right? And we need to honor and respect that. Unfortunately, we've become women living in a man's world, trying to become a man, trying to match up to them. And our testosterone levels are through the roof right now, which is now triggering PCOS, PCOD, infertility, gynecological disorders for a lot of women. Two, we're suppressing a lot of emotions because we've not created a safe space for women to come out and express themselves. Amongst their own peers and friends, there's a lot of competitiveness, jealousy, envy. There's this fear of scarcity. We function from a place of scarcity. Women sometimes end up becoming their own worst enemies, right? You need to switch off the outside noise. You're constantly stimulated by information from the society, from the community, from social media, from friends and peers, and even your parents sometimes who are projecting their expectations onto you. You need to switch off all of that and go into your shell, your cocoon, your safe space. Lots of women spend a lot of time in the shower because that's a safe space where they get to hear their own thoughts, right? So go into your cocoon, do your gratitude manifestation journal, and start journaling and putting down those disturbing, conflicting thoughts in your mind and understand why you had that thought. What was the root cause of that thought? What emotion was underlying it? Was it insecurity? Was it jealousy? Was it envy? Was it anger? Was it pent-up frustration from many years? Was it suppressed emotion that you haven't expressed well? Start laying out your emotions bare. Don't be afraid of judgment. Don't be afraid of biases. Be who you are. Women are meant to be fierce providers, nourishers, and protectors when the time comes. That's how nature has built us. We can play all roles, but choose your battles wisely and choose your roles wisely. You don't have to perform all of them. Don't try to be all.
Yeah, I think there's this generation of women who've decided that they want to be career women. But the responsibilities at home haven't gone down, have suddenly found themselves doing like the man's job and the woman's job. And all of that burden that they carry is probably showing up in the anxiety, stress, early menopause, all of these symptoms. What is the best time to do this journaling, and how do we start the process of this detox from social media and all of the information that's also further stressing us out? I mean, 2026 has just started. What would be the 2-3 practical ways to get on
Yeah.
this journey of emotional healing?
The morning hours are the best. There's no traffic in the city and in the universe. The universe can listen to you. 5 to 6 a.m. is when I find solitude, solace, and my intuitive intelligence at the peak compared to the rest of the day. If you can tap into that 5 to 6 a.m. clock, right? 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. is supposed to be the most powerful. 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. is the Vata clock. Brahma Muhurat begins 1 hour 48 minutes before sunrise.
Yeah.
Even if you can just tap into that 5 to 6 a.m. clock, you're not thinking about your husband, you're not thinking about your children, you're not thinking about your career, your parents, or your in-laws, or your neighbors and your society peers and colleagues. That 1 hour is pure self-love and devotion to yourself. You know, we say Atma mein hi Paramatma hai. You're looking for God outside of you, but the God is inside of you. You just need to peel the layers off. It's like an onion being peeled. It's going to be painful. It's going to bring out a lot of tears. 5 to 6 a.m., get a journal out. Start writing the thoughts that are conflicting, disturbing. Usually you find at 5 in the morning that you can't remember most of them. And good if you don't remember them. That means it was not important. It was very trivial. If you still remember them, then that means it has to be resolved. Start writing it down in an unemotional manner without getting involved with that story. And then start writing things that you're grateful for. When you start expressing gratitude, the beautiful thing that happens is your vibrational frequency goes up. So when we're angry, we're at a negative vibrational frequency, which is say minus 50 MHz or something. But when I start vibrating at gratitude, at self-love, it's 540 MHz, the highest vibrational frequency human beings can produce on their own. Higher frequencies than that would be the sounds from nature or sounds from a musical instrument. It can go up to 1,000 frequency, 10,000 frequency, which can destroy cancer cells in our body. When you start vibrating at a higher frequency, you start releasing serotonin and dopamine. That makes you feel deliriously happy without any reason, without any excuse. And you start attracting events at that frequency. Then you write down what you want to manifest for the day, for the week, for the month, for the year, for the next 5 years. When you write down things, there's more clarity. You can go through the muck and find that rare diamond that you are, right? You peel the layers and look within. That's how powerful that 5 to 6 a.m. self-devotion time is.
I am a very strong believer of this whole Brahma Muhurat and have like really been trying to wake up at least before 6 a.m. Not able to wake up at 4 something. Even Elon Musk talks about the Brahma Muhurat, by the way.
Look at that, right?
You know, best ideas actually come around 4 a.m.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of friends, including my husband, who really believe that their circadian rhythm is different. Like my husband says that on ChatGPT he's checked and his circadian rhythm is different, and you know he cannot sleep before 12 o'clock, and you know that 12 to 7 is the sleeping window for his body, and that's how, you know, if he tries doing it, he feels sick.
Yeah.
Do you think there is like a common clock for all of us, and the 2 to 6 a.m. seems like a, you know, window like very, very few people we know can actually tap into? So what do you say to the non-believers there?
So, you know, we're made of nature. We're not made of any kind of metal.
Yeah.
We're made of nature, and we respond and reciprocate to nature. We come from nature, go back to nature. So if your birth and death is natural and determined by nature, why is everything else in between not natural? Right? It has to be nature bound. Rise with the sun, set with the sun, because we're diurnal beings that correspond to the position of the sun and the moon. Now, what has happened in today's day and age is we're overstimulated between 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. We're overstimulated with information, the news, the social media, the noise. There's so much stimulation of information, and there's such huge pressure to socialize and party from 7 o'clock till 10 o'clock. Multiple, cuisines that you're consuming. You're having like a 7-course, 10-course dish. That causes your body to stay awake because your body is tricked due to all this artificial lights into believing that it's daylight. So your body doesn't produce melatonin, and hence you're not sleepy, and hence you think that's your natural circadian rhythm. But the same person, if you remove them from this environment of overstimulation, put them in a natural place, a retreat in the mountains where the lights switch off at 9 p.m. sharp, the electronics switch off at 7 p.m. maybe, or the last meal is at 6 o'clock and they don't give you food after that. The last meal is at 6:37, you're fully digested, you're fully absorbed and assimilated the nutrients. 9 p.m. the lights are off. You sit in that darkness for 1 hour. Tell me if you haven't fallen asleep by 10 o'clock. It's impossible. Because now finally your body's like, okay, there's darkness. I'm going to produce melatonin. If you're going to have caffeine till 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the evening, the melatonin cannot attach to the receptors. There's still caffeine being attached to the receptors, your cell receptors. And hence your body's tricked into thinking it's awake. And what does a person do when they're awake? They engage in maximum productivity. There are a lot of celebrities also who work out in the night.
Yeah.
You're stimulating your body again and you think you're high energy, and then you're going to bed with all that unused energy. It's something that we've tricked ourselves into believing that I'm a nocturnal being. None of us are nocturnal. We're all diurnal beings. Can a tree decide to grow horizontally instead of vertically? Can a bird decide to, fly backwards or just stay afloat in the air without flapping its wings? There are certain dynamics of nature that you can't change.
So you think not even like 5-10% of the population on Earth is like more nocturnal? Like
They're
not-
functioning.
because of the environment, not because of the inherent.
Yes, they're overstimulated and hence functioning and hence productive at night. But there's a heavy price to pay. Reason being, your liver starts detoxifying the body actively between 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., which is the time of deep REM sleep, proven by science. 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., if you miss this clock, if you're awake, if you're engaging in some kind of productive activity or socializing or partying or whatever, right? Or even if you're at work, your liver's not getting the rest it needs, and hence it has postponed the detoxification to the next day. It keeps building, and eventually one of your organ takes the beating. So in the short term, you feel good. You've had caffeine to fake that energy. You've had blue light to confuse you into believing that it's still broad daylight and hence you can function. In the short term, it works. But ask a lot of night shift workers. Over the few years, their immunity
Health
drops,
declines.
their metabolism drops, and they start becoming at higher risk of autoimmune disorders because you've broken your circadian rhythm inside.
So you're saying in the 24-hour cycle that the liver operates, 10 to 2, it's the most active.
It's the most active for detoxification.
For
Rest of the day, it's digesting complex foods. Every organ has a role, and every organ has a specific time period for it. Like traditional Chinese medicine has a Chinese clock. Ayurvedic science has the Ayurvedic energy clock. For example, 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. is when the mental faculties are the sharpest because it's very light. There's no food in your system, right? There's no excess water in your system. There's no traffic and noise and stimulation in the universe outside. 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., your mental faculties, the sukshma energy, the subtle energies are stronger. 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., your body's gross energies, earth and water is more dominant. And hence, this is a great time for you to nourish yourself, exercise, burn off the fat, and sweat out the toxins. Okay? 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. is highest productivity. The sun is at the peak. Your metabolic fire is at the peak. Your digestive fire is at the peak. You can have the largest meal of the day and accomplish the most amount of jobs, tasks, and execute them. 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Again, your creative faculties are at the peak. Your mental faculties are sharp again. But here you have external stimulation compared to in the morning. This is a great time for you to call for a strategic business meeting, team meetings, resolve problems creatively, right? And you also, 6 p.m., you start slowing down. Okay, you shouldn't be stimulating your body after 6 p.m. So exercising aggressively after 6 p.m.
So no workouts in the evening.
If you're someone who doesn't find time in the morning, it's better to exercise in the evening, I feel, than to not exercise at all. But don't overstimulate yourself just before bedtime. You're not going to be able to fall asleep. And then you're putting your organs to, work. Your kidneys, for example, don't like excess hydration late in the evenings. They like hydration throughout the day so that you can get up and go to the bathroom. But when you go to bed with a lot of water, your kidney has to work overtime all night. And that leads to disrupted sleep pattern, frequent urination in the long run, and can lead to other kidney disorders in your later years. So in the short term, everything looks great. But in the long term, if you're talking from longevity perspective, your circadian rhythm has to be synced with the sun, not based on our personal desires.
And no coffee after 2.
I would say, Italy, this is you functioning, right, on caffeine. In Italy, they don't have coffee after 11:30, 12. The effects of caffeine doesn't wear off for at least 10 to 12 hours. It puts you into a fight or flight mode for at least 3 days, right? You're overstimulated. Your cortisol is up. And you have this fake dopamine rush. And then the energy crash that comes tricks you into having 2 cups of coffee next. That energy crash will lead to 4 cups of coffee next. So you're in this, hamster in a wheel situation. You're not getting out of that trap. The trap is just getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, I think workout and coffee to fir bhi theek hai. One of the things that you mentioned was no screen after 7. So if you look at like
Yeah.
all social media analytics, your
9
own
p.m. is highest.
yeah, it's 7 to 10 is the peak, and
Oh
the
gosh.
highest is like 8 to 10 p.m.
Ask me how it's ruined my sleep. Because I post my content at 9:20 p.m. every day.
Okay.
That's high algorithm.
Yeah, high engagement, yeah.
engagement as per the algorithm. And when I'm posting at 9:20, I finish posting and suddenly something interesting show up. Suddenly another interesting
And
thing.
then you
and
get
then you end up
sucked
scrolling,
into
right?
the-
You get stuck in a loop. So I keep telling myself, the biggest resolution for this year is to not get addicted to that loop
Yeah.
and switch it off after my content is done at 9:20. 9:30 is my last cutoff. And at least 1 hour before that also, I do not expose myself to blue light. There's bare minimum light in the house. There's enough food on the plate to get, easily digested, like soup and sorted vegetables, nothing complex. But you have to switch off. And I like to sit in that darkness actually, for at least 20 minutes before going to bed. I like to sit in that darkness on my bed, collect my thoughts. What happened today? Why did it happen? Release the thoughts it's not necessary. Stretch my body, focus on my breath, empty my mind, and then go to bed. I want to have a restful sleep. I don't want to have an active, dream sequence happening in my sleep, and then I wake up feeling more tired. I don't want that feeling, right? I want to have a restful sleep. And that's going to happen if you give your body at least 20, 30 minutes to de-stress, decompress, and then you decode. That's the best thing. Disconnect, decompress, de-stress, detox, decode. That's the 5 Ds for mental health.
Incredible. I think a lot of people will be questioning their schedule after watching this, especially
so.
all the. I think the post 7 p.m. digital detox is probably the hardest.
7 maybe might be a far-fetched goal. At least start with 9 p.m.
9 p.m.
1 hour before bedtime. For me, 9:20 is a cutoff at the moment because I need to post something at 9:20, right? But try to do at least an hour before
And you
bedtime.
sleep around 10 and you wake up at 5.
So usually that's my sleep cycle. So when I sleep at 10, I wake up at 4:30 automatically, right? But if I'm sleeping at 12, my eyes open at 6, but I force myself to stay in bed for an extra hour so that I'm not tired throughout the whole day. But that's not healthy. I don't like sleeping at 12. I love waking up at 5. I love waking up at 4:30. My body is just so much more active, so much more stimulated, and so much more fresh. I love that feeling in that morning.
And the 6.5 hours of sleep is good for you.
Sometimes even 4 hours of sleep is great. I've noticed.
If it's deep sleep.
You need to wake up when your eyes open. Your body has its natural cycle. You don't need an alarm. Sometimes I sleep at 10 o'clock and I would just wake up at 2:30 or 3 and I'm right awake and I'm not tired because my body has done the job of repairing the damaged tissues, muscles and nerves, and the body's up. Then you just listen to your body.
And talking about these doshas, so everybody will have a pitta or a vata. It can't be that I have some signs of a vata, some signs of a pitta.
You can be a dual.
So how do we figure out कि हमारा कौन सा दोष है, and then how do we balance it?
So in Ayurveda, we say we have the 5 elements in our body, right? And this is again not a mystical science. It's proven by modern science that we're made of only earth, water, fire, air, and space, right? There's nothing astronomical or magical about us. So we come in the purest form of these 5 elements and we disintegrate back into these 5 elements when we die. We don't take anything with us. Ayurveda says we all have these 5 elements in different proportions of it, right? The permutations and combinations vary from one person to another. So earth and water becomes kapha, which is the basic biological building block that builds your bones, muscles, tissues, teeth, nails, and hair. So the gross body that you see is kapha. And then you have the fire element, which is the pitta, that brings your body to life. As long as we're warm, we're alive. And then when we're 0 degrees, we're as good as dead, right? So that warm energy is responsible for your digestion. It's responsible for converting the food into digestive juices into plasma, blood, bone, muscles, tissues, teeth, nails, and hair. That transformation happens due to the presence of that warm energy, which we call as Agni in the stomach, and transformative fire in different parts of the body. And then we have air and space. We have it throughout our body. We have it in our lungs, we have it in our bones, we have it in our mind. We wouldn't be able to think, if we didn't have air and space in our mind. That is responsible for vata, which is movement in your body. So kapha gives you the gross structure, the physical stability. Pitta gives you the fire to come alive. And vata gives you the air and space to move. So your ability to move, to breathe, your lungs contracting, expanding, your heart beating, your blood circulating is all due to the presence of vata. The mother's ability to push the baby out of the womb is also due to the presence of vata, which goes up dramatically at the time of delivery. Now, we're all different permutations and combinations of it. Now, some people can be kapha dominant, which means kapha is more dominant than pitta and vata in the body. Some can be pitta or vata dominant. I'm a dual body type. I'm a pitta vata dominant.
Okay.
But pitta is on the higher side, vata is on the lower side. You can also be a vata pitta dominant. Vata is heavier. You can be a pitta kapha vata. Those are dual body types. You can also be a tridoshik body type, which is considered the best body type. But all three are in equal proportions. But the worst is tridoshik imbalance, where all three doshas are out of balance. That means more diseases in the body. So it's a very simple science, and all of it has linguistics or language in modern science. So kapha is called endomorph, pitta is called mesomorph, vata is called ectomorph. As simple as that.
And it is possible that you evolve through life into different balances.
Yes and no. Your unique biological blueprint is called your prakriti in Ayurveda, right? So your fingerprints don't change an entire lifetime. Your blood group doesn't change an entire lifetime. Your genetic source of information doesn't change. Your DNA cannot change, right? The information that you've got in your DNA from your parents is permanent. The information that you'll pass on to your kids may change based on what you've done in your entire lifetime. Have you consumed a lot of antibiotics? Have you, consumed a lot of external, done a lot of external procedures on yourself? Those things can pass on in the DNA to the next generation. Your body type is fixed at the time of being conceived based on the health of the sperm, health of the egg, health of the uterus, and the kind of diet the mother followed during pregnancy. These are the 4 factors. And it doesn't change an entire lifetime. But through the day, through the weeks, months, and years, based on the season, based on the climatic conditions, based on what I've eaten and had, my vikriti, imbalance, can keep changing. For example, if I've just had a meal, my kapha will be higher because I'm heavy right now. And if I'm busy digesting or exercising, my pitta will be higher. If I'm running, my vata will be higher. So your imbalance can change every minute, literally, based on the activity that you're performing. But your unique prakriti will never change.
I was just looking at for एक टेबल बना हुआ है बहुत अच्छा सा आपकी बुक में कहीं तो जहाँ पे you can identify.
Yes.
But when I was trying to do that, I saw that अरे lean body तो इसमें है, but oily skin इसमें है. But so how does one figure कि मेरा कौन सा, and how did you so specifically figure that you have these two and एक ज़्यादा है एक कम है? Because many of us feel like we have this also and that also.
Oh yeah. So there are 2 ways of doing it. The book has this book has it. This book has the Prakriti test.
Yeah.
Right? And when you answer those 25-30 questions, it'll tell you the score. Say for Vata, you have a score of 10. For a Pitta, you have a score of 8. And for a Kapha, you have a score of 3. So 10 plus 8, 18. You're a Vata Pitta body type.
Okay.
Vata is more dominant and Pitta is a second dominant figure.
Okay.
So you're a Vata Pitta body type. But this is a self-diagnosis. How do you find out what your blood group is? At least once in a lifetime, you've gone to a doctor and done a blood test as a child, as an infant. They tell you as soon as the child is born, this is a blood group, right? But you don't go again and again to the doctor to find out what your body type is. So at least once in a lifetime, it's good to go to a good Ayurvedic doctor because they'll check your pulse. And they'll be able to tell you from your pulse what is your dominant body type. Just based on the pulse. And once you know what your dominant body type is, you can spend the rest of your life building on that with information and knowledge and health tips from everywhere to design your own diet and lifestyle. So 2 ways of doing it: self-diagnosis or go to a seasoned Ayurvedic doctor. And between the Ayurvedic doctors also, sometimes they may differ in their opinion, but it's very marginal. The difference of opinion, very marginal and negligible, I would say.
In fact, there was a company on Shark Tank which had a device that used your pulse to also recommend. Do you think that would be, is that the only thing, the pulse, or there are a lot of factors like the heat, the pulse, and it cannot be translated to a device?
It can be translated to a device, some part, So the device will tell you what your body type is. But the device cannot diagnose your symptoms and prescribe a diet and a lifestyle to you yet. There are other factors. They will look at your tongue, they will look at your eyes, they will look at your skin, and they will ask a lot of questions which the device cannot ask you. They will ask you a lot of questions. What kind of a medical history your father had, your mother had, your grandparents had? What kind of a childhood did you have? What kind of genetic history do you have? What kind of diseases and symptoms you had as a child? For example, now I'm sitting here. Both of us have clear skin. But maybe as a teenager, we had a lot of acne and pimples. And that's an information I will say only if the person asks. I might not think of it when dealing with a device. A device is a great value addition to what human intelligence is. It's not a replacement for human intelligence. It's a value addition for sure. And that's where we're progressing, right? We're progressing into marrying AI with human wisdom. If I have all the information stacked up, for me to take an intuitive decision based on that is easier. But I need the information first. So the device gives you that information. So why not?
Is there any Ayurvedic principle that you've changed your mind about over the years, that you believed in but don't believe in now, or didn't believe in but now believe in?
Let me tell you about the ones that I didn't believe in and I've started believing in, because that's where I started. I started as a non-believer, right? I didn't believe in the colonics, the Matra and the Kada Basti treatments. But when I saw patients transform in front of my eyes in the clinic, I saw patients with multiple sclerosis after the treatment started walking on their own without physical support. I was like, wow, that's 14 days. In 14 days, they were able to show that results. I saw patients reverse a lot of comorbidities like thyroid, PCOS, PCOD, infertility, gynecological disorders, and conceive naturally. Colonics was something that I didn't believe in because it didn't look comfortable to me in the beginning, but I believe in it very, very strongly. If you can flush out the toxins in your body.
What is colonics?
So in the modern day, culture, clinics do colonics with water, which I don't recommend. They use 30, 40 liters of water, run it through your intestines and pull out all the waste. But I'm not a big fan of it because it pulls out the good bacteria and the bad bacteria.
It's supposed to be cleaning the colon. Basically.
Yeah. Okay. It cleans the colon, large intestine and small intestine.
Okay.
So all the trapped fecal matter from your body basically comes out.
Got it.
But along with that, your good and bad bacteria gets flushed out. People have started doing a lot of these, strange enemas, which is, by the way, is very risky. Saltwater enema, herbal tea enema, coffee enema. It makes them flush out everything because it irritates the colon, and you lose like 1 to 2, pounds, and you look like you have a flat belly for an event or a party or for a shoot.
But it's actually dehydrating.
It's dehydrating, and it's irritating and corroding the mucus lining, which is a protective layer that prevents leaky gut syndrome. Now that's gone, your dehydrated colon starts sticking to each other, the gut, leading to long-term constipation issues. In Ayurveda, we do something called Matra and Kada Basti. So Matra Basti is where they use a medicated oil with almost 60 to 70 herbs cooked in it. So it's the herbs that's entering your colon, and the oil is simply a medium for it to come in. And because of the nature of oil, when you lubricate the colon, the body has already set aside the toxins it wants to eliminate. You're just simply assisting the evacuation process, not triggering anything. You're assisting the process that the body has always wanted it, okay? And it also enhances a good microbiome because of the good bacteria that is found in the herbs. These are live bacteria, and it's a fermented product by itself. We lubricate the colon for 2 to 3 days. And the lubricant stays in the colon for 1 to 12 hours. It doesn't come out immediately. It just stays in 100 ml, 50 ml, 60 ml. It stays and lubricates the system and prepares for evacuation. On the third day or the second day, when the body is ready, we introduce 1 liter of medicine through the colon, and the person immediately goes to the bathroom and flushes out the waste. That medicine is again cooked in the clinic with almost like 8 to 10 herbs boiled together, medicated honey, medicated oil, and medicated herbal concoctions in it. That's a very potent way to flush out 99% of the toxins from the colon, to stimulate your uterus, also to flush out the toxins. Your hormonal imbalances come out, undigested metabolic waste. Only your unhealthy bacteria comes out because your body is releasing what it wants to release. You're not pushing it out. So that's something that I've started believing in strongly after witnessing, such amazing transformative results in our patients.
And you've mentioned very elaborately the rainbow diet, like certain colors of fruits and vegetables impact certain things, including like cancer.
Yeah.
So what are like the 3-4 favorite colors, and what do they impact?
So, something as simple as red food. Red colored foods, your red grapes, resveratrol, right? Then you have red grapes, and you have maybe your red capsicum, capsaicin.
Strawberries.
Right, strawberries. Strawberries is great for thyroid patients. It has a good amount of iodine in it. Lots of people don't know that. Red foods are extremely good for your blood.
For the blood.
Okay, so if you've donated blood, the first thing they'll ask you to have is grape juice or beetroot juice to rebuild the RBC, because they have enough hemoglobin to support the RBC production and thus your blood production. So if you're someone who is pale, has low hemoglobin levels, it's anemic, and you're anemic in person, then you can have grape juice, you can have beetroot juice. Beetroot also has beta carotene, which is great for your liver enzymes. It generates new liver enzymes, right? It's healthier. If you're someone who is low on roughage, you can have a lot of greens. Okay, you have your spinach, celery, cilantro, curry leaves, moringa, spirulina. They also reduce inflammation and oxidative stress in the body. Okay, then we want to fight off cancer
We
cells on a
thought
daily basis.
green leads to better blood, more
Oh,
iron.
yes, both of it.
Okay.
Green gets its color from red. If you look at spinach, green gets its color from red, right? So the deep green actually comes from red. Green is great for your blood. Red is great for your blood and cardiac health. Purple is great for your cancer cells. Like, if you want to destroy cancer cells, purple, indigo colored foods are the ones that you go to.
I think there's a lot of research now on those
Yeah.
purple
Anthocyanins.
cabbage, anthocyanins. Yeah.
So you have your purple cabbage, blueberries, blackberries. You know the kala jamun in India that we have during a certain season? Excellent for the pancreatic health. It reduces the sugar spike by almost 50-60%. Cinnamon has the same result, right? What you want to stay away from is the beige foods. White colored foods are also good for some people. Like, say, white colored foods would be your dairy products, doodh, dahi, paneer, cheese, butter, buttermilk, white rice. It's good for children who want to put on weight. Bananas, right? You have your yellow foods. They're the sunrise foods. They get you a lot of energy. Your yellow capsicum and all of that. Orange foods, your carrots. They're great for your eye health. They also have carotene, which is great for your overall health and prevents even suntan and sunburns. Beige foods is what you need to stay away from. What are the beige foods? No, beige is your breads and pastas, pizzas, burgers. They're processed. They have no color. They're beige. They're simple carbs. They cause sugar spikes, obesity, diabetes, cholesterol, cardiac health issues. That's a food group you need to reduce or stay away from. And otherwise, eat your rainbows. Your red, yellow, green, orange. Eat all of them.
Super. All right, so some short questions, rapid fire. So one Ayurvedic habit that you never skip.
Abhyangam. I love it.
How often do you do it?
Whenever my skin feels dry, I take like a good 20 minutes off to, lubricate my skin with good sesame oil.
Sesame oil that's warm.
Either warm, or you can just take it in your hand and rub it between your palms and apply it all over your body. Like, if you find it too tedious to go into the kitchen and then warm it and then go back and massage, it's fine.
One habit that you struggle to be consistent with?
I guess the 5 a.m. clock. The stimulation in the evening. Sometimes I'm tempted to play pickleball or squash in the evening, and then I get stimulated. Then you sleep an hour late, then you wake up an hour late.
Yeah, you can either be a social animal or a social media /social media animal, or you can be the 5 a.m. club. For me, you to make both work, it's damn hard.
Unfortunately, we're in an overstimulated economy in a society. Socializing is no more limited to Saturdays and Sundays. It's happening through the week. Invitations are coming in, and then you don't know which ones to say no to, which ones to stick by. So you have to make your choices. You have to choose your friends as well.
What's the best way to eat fruits?
With a handful of nuts or seeds, so you cancel the sugar spike. And if you're diabetic, a pinch of cinnamon powder on top.
Your take on supplements like magnesium glycinate, biotin, collagen?
I think natural sources will always supersede and be superior any day to supplements, because if your Agni is weak, if your digestive fire is weak, no matter what you eat, your body can't absorb and assimilate. You can have the most expensive supplements. You're literally paying for expensive urine. So work on your digestive fire first, stimulate your gut health, and you'll be able to absorb and assimilate the nutrients from natural foods. Supplements is, again, something that I would say in an extreme case where you're extremely deficient or malnourished because of the society or, a community that you live in which doesn't have access to certain kind of foods, then maybe.
What percentage of India do you think is lactose intolerant?
Or we're all becoming a lactose intolerant economy, and a society at large. Korea and China call themselves lactose intolerant nations. India was not, because we used to have our own cows. We had cows that were happy. They gave us enough milk to their calf and to us. Unhappy cow cannot give you healthy milk. And all of us are moving towards lactose intolerance because of that reason.
Your guilty pleasure that doesn't fit your wellness image?
Oh my God, I love crunchy snacks. So I have found, thankfully, a healthy replacement. So instead of having potato chips, I would probably have roasted barley chips or millet chips.
Yeah,
or a millet
khakra.
khakra. Right? I love crunchy snacks. Then you have your carrot and cucumber with hummus. You may not always have it, but that's a great replacement.
Your favorite skincare product?
Face massage with some herbal medicated oils. We have Kumkumadi Thailam or coconut oil.
So you have a history of acne, but you are happy to use oils on your face.
Because it actually hydrates your skin better.
Yeah.
And it also opens up the pores, takes out the excess sebum that is poured. It takes oil to cleanse out oil. Have you noticed that?
Yeah,
When
you
you have
use a cleansing balm or a cleansing oil when you really need to remove the pollution,
and the makeup and the
sunscreen,
toxins.
makeup.
So it actually takes oil to cleanse out the excess oil from your skin and balance the pH level.
All right. What trending skincare should people stop using?
Trending skincare, I think over dehydrating your skin with
Yeah.
over cleansing products, that's something I'm not a big fan of. You're washing away the good oils. There's a trick. At night, wash your face well. Double wash it if you have to because of there's too much pollution and makeup. Apply your serums, moisturizing cream, load up. At night, your skin can absorb a lot of it.
Yeah.
And then in the morning when you wake up, do not use a face wash.
Don't use a face wash.
No. Use plain water because throughout the night, your body has released a lot of sebum through the pores. Those are the good moisturizing oils that the body has created to moisturize and heal your skin. You want to keep it. So in the morning, you wash your face only with water, not a face wash. That trick has actually given me better skin.
Very interesting. Should try it out sometime. And what are the best foods for acne?
I would say beetroot, carrot, spinach, make a soup, celery juice, reduce inflammation.
Best foods for pollution?
First of all, steam inhalation with a few drops of eucalyptus oil. And you can have carrot juice. That's also very good for your lung health. You can have ashgar juice, celery juice to reduce inflammation or flush out the pollutants and toxins. And jal neti.
Any viral Ayurvedic claim made on social media that doesn't make sense?
Everybody's going gung-ho on Shilajit and Ashwagandha.
You don't believe in Shilajit?
I do believe in it, but I feel when the wrong person has it, it can lead to other side effects.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right?
Because Shilajit is not just India, it's a global phenomenon. Now there are Indian companies selling like 500 crore of Shilajit in US.
Oh my God, that's
it's
crazy.
way out of
right?
control, yeah.
But I guess US can absorb it because, it's such an unhealthy food culture that Americans have. 80% of the food is beige, processed, packaged. Barely 10-20% of the food is fresh fruits and vegetables. So they do definitely need another herb to balance them. But if you're in an Indian culture, in a tropical country like ours, you must speak to an Ayurvedic doctor before consuming any herb.
What kind of people should not have Shilajit?
See, I'm not an expert on Shilajit, but I can tell you something on Ashwagandha.
Okay.
If you're someone with very high metabolic fire, Ashwagandha does not do well for you.
Oh,
It can
really?
aggravate you even more. But if you're someone who's very slow, Shilajit, the same rule, okay? If your metabolic fire is very high, then the herb is not going to do you any good. It's going to aggravate you,
Super interesting.
right? So it depends on your body type as well.
And what temperature should we have our food and our water at?
Water, I prefer lukewarm. Warm water is great for your gut motility. It improves the peristalsis, the downward moving wind principle. It also washes out the toxins and the waste. If you don't like hot water, and if you're also someone who's prone to GERD and acidity, room temperature water is great. Cold water is a strict no, because cold water only diminishes your agni and makes you more thirsty later. It's not good. Food, if you can hold it in your hand for 5 seconds and not feel the heat, not feel burnt, then you can put it in your tummy, in your mouth, because when you drink hot soup and hot teas and coffee, it burns your gut lining, right? If you can put your pinky finger in and withstand the temperature for 5 seconds, the coffee and tea, then you can drink it. Some people love that kick, of hot drinks,
Hot, yeah.
but it ruptures and erodes your gut lining.
And some people really need to microwave their food for like 2 minutes to make it like piping hot before they eat. Do you need that, or is that?
I prefer fresh off the stove instead of microwaving. If you can get a pan and put a lid, put a little bit of moisture in that meal again, a little bit of water, and cook it really well. Make it piping hot if you want to. And then when you put it on your plate, make sure to say a little prayer and eat your food with your hands. Your hands will be able to gauge the temperature better and slow down your overeating tendencies or burning your tongue.
And do you believe in cold plunges?
It's for some people again. It's very personalized. Cold plunges are great for those who are prone to inflammation, arthritis, rheumatism, spondylitis, body aches, pain. Those who have GERD, acidity, reflux, cold plunges really helps reduce inflammation. But if you're someone who's prone to cold, cough, sinus, allergy, mucus, obesity, or weight gain, you don't do well with cold plunges. You do better with a steam and a sauna. You need something to stimulate your metabolism, not suppress it. Right? Inflammation is when your metabolism is also over, stimulated. Then you need to bring it down to a state of balance. Cold plunges works then.
Awesome. All right. So, a couple of last questions. Firstly, before I read your book, I read the long foreword by
Yeah.
Juhi Chawla, and like the idea that you went through. I mean, all the health conditions you
Yeah.
mentioned, but also a lot of emotional stress around like the burnout, your
Yeah.
abusive marriage, and then you turned your life around.
Yeah.
Now, there are these people watching you right now in
Yeah.
their 20s who are probably at rock bottom
Yeah.
for something, either relationships are not working, have some health crisis, career is not going where. So,
Yeah.
from your experience of the Dimple that rebuilt her whole life and took control of it,
Yeah.
what's the advice you want to give to them, those who are at rock bottom right now?
Okay, this too shall pass. That's the mantra that you should remember, because nothing is permanent in life. Not even this moment of distress, pain, sorrow, unhappiness that you're experiencing. This too shall pass. That's number one. Number two, start visualizing yourself in the future. What's the person that you'd like to see yourself become? I did not visualize this part of my life, but I did visualize myself becoming independent financially, socially, mentally, emotionally, and also living in a different society. I kept visualizing that and I kept working backwards from that. So my plans were always long term. While I was doing an MBA, I was financially unstable. I didn't have a source of income. But I started visualizing myself becoming an investment banker, and I worked it backwards. So before becoming an investment banker, I said, let's get into television so that I can network with all the HNIs and the finance experts. And for television, I knew I had to get into CNBC. Backwards, I knew I had to do some work with a local TV channel to get into CNBC. So I tapped into News 9. So I did my portfolio photo shoot, cut my hair, learned how to wear makeup, bought new clothes, went for a photo shoot. In 7 days, I landed a job as a TV reporter while still in college. In 3 months, I landed a job in CNBC. And in 1 year after, I became an investment banker. So I visualized everything backwards. No matter where you are, visualize the shore that you're going to get to. And visualize that person you're going to become. Beautiful, successful, happy, healthy, strong. And never forget that what you've become is due to the people around you. So extend that kindness to the next person you see who's struggling. Give them that strength that they deserve.
Love it. And I love that in your book you talk so much about donating, just earning good karma,
Yeah.
being grateful. I think some of these small things over the years have just, they're not cool enough
No.
and they're not glamorous enough. They don't get talked about.
Yeah.
But I really believe in the power of, doing
Karma.
good, and good stuff happens to you. And I hope a lot of good happens to you. You're incredible. And I just, want to finally ask you one last question. What's next for Dimple?
For the longest time, I was very content with what I had. It gave me a lot of happiness and peace. But now I would like to share this with the rest of the world, which would be the new generation that's coming. I have a lot of hope. And also, I'm very fond of the Gen Z. I feel they have so much potential to save the world and turn the story around for us. So I'd love to work with them and share our products and services with that generation. We'll be bottling happiness and getting it across homes.
Amazing. And you're right. I think Gen Z believe in ancient wisdom a lot more than millennials ever
Yeah.
did. And
Yeah.
that gives me a lot of hope for our future.
Yeah.
And a lot of hope for you making Ayurveda cool again. All the best for your next mission, and keep inspiring.
Thank you so much.
you.
Thank you for
so much
holding
for
space
this.
for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching or for listening. And अगर आपको ये एपिसोड पसंद आया तो आपको वही करना है जो हर पॉडकास्टर आपसे कराता है, which is you have to hit like, subscribe and also a comment so that हमें समझ आए कि आपको क्या पसंद आ रहा है, क्या नहीं पसंद आ रहा है. And if you want us to bring someone on this podcast, any guest that you have in mind or any question that's remained unanswered, please put them in the comments below. I read every single comment down below. So until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep building the life that you love, just like I'm doing.